I'd like to invite our speakers, Gloriana and Erica, and Mike Seamus is probably not there, but Michael Lesk and Bob Thibodeau, to kind of provide their perspective for the future. What if you could do anything you want? What would you do to make access to all the intellectual IP-related products that are currently not available? Why don't we start with our first speaker, Bob Thibodeau. Bob?
Yeah, so the thing that I would do if I could, but I don't think I'm gonna ever do this again, is I sat on several of the international ISO standards committees and did some international standards for interfaces. A number of them, about 4 or 5. And each of these are multi-year tasks to doing once. So for example, one of the ones I did was a video labeling standard in Europe, okay, which is a international standard that says how you interface to a satellite feed for video. What we'd like to have are international standards that are convened through ISO, which is the United Nations. And the committees start, and these are voluntary, this is voluntary. These standards become international standards so that a library can know that they don't have to have a proprietary, or an archive can know they don't have to have a proprietary interface to some level of access to their content. And all of the content can be read using the same software, whether it's the content itself or how to access the content, or ways in which you can make requests of the content, which is one of the things I was pointing out, on a worldwide basis. And that involves typically one of these standards committees is 4 to 5 people total. And every one of the ones I've been in, it's 4 or 5 people, maybe 20 show up over the period of 4, 5, 6 years to do the standard, but it's really 4 or 5 people. So it's not a great leap for humanity to do these things, okay? But it does require, and under ISO, it requires every country has 1 vote. So the 4 or 5 people, each one represents 1 vote, okay, on what these interfaces look like. And I think it's just a matter of setting up the interfaces so that the queries can be done, so that the intelligence can be put into the system, and so forth. And you don't have to worry about following 10,000 APIs for 1 piece of data, or even knowing what the APIs are. What you have is a single set of standards. And out of that, and within that, we could have a copyright standard. We can have a copyright interface standard on a worldwide basis that allows the queries to be made and ascertaining how the copyright fees are to be paid in order to remunerate the archive owners and the information providers as to how this works. That activity is 0 and has been 0 for many years now, with the exception of what happens in the video world where we do have such standards.
Thank you, Bob. So why don't we, there are a lot of questions coming in. Why don't we have Michael Lesk comment, and then Erica and Gloriana, and then we can begin to see if there are questions that might be worthy, maybe able to. Yeah, go ahead.
So when I think, I have often said that when you try to put something online, you get into 4 problems in this order: technical, economic, legal, and social. The technical problems are mostly solved. The late Jim Gray once said to me, may all your problems be technical. The economic problems, surprisingly, even though libraries have never been profit-making organizations to my memory, we're not really running afoul on economic problems, only probably because computing has gotten so cheap. Then we have the legal problems, and we're still struggling with those in a lot of areas, and we could use everything Bob said. But there is a large area, namely data, where we don't have a copyright problem. You know, nobody has a copyright on the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. So the real problem is showing up as social. People who do not want to share data, because if data is the new oil, they want to own it. And we need somehow a reward structure.
Okay, somehow we seem to have gotten cut off.
Michael is back.
Oh, okay. Erica, Gloriana?
Michael, you're on mute.
I'm now back, I hope. So I said we're up to the social problem, people being possessive. And if the universities could change so that, I'll phrase it historically, instead of giving all the credit to Kepler and reducing Tycho Brahe to a footnote, if they reversed their importance, because to be nasty, anybody could have analyzed the data once someone did the heavy work of creating it, then we might get people who were even aggressive about sharing data instead of keeping it secret in the hope they could get the next publication. So that's what I'd like to see happen.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Erica?
Yeah, so something that's occurred to me is that because most of us are in academe, we sometimes miss out on something. There's a certain kind of, what shall I say, activism, advocacy that needs to be marshaled in order to effectively change things. And I think, I don't know how we bring that to the fore. One way I would argue this is that within the library and perhaps within the academy, there are so many people who are dependent on this kind of access. Perhaps that's a way to sort of marshal, think about how do you marshal this going forward? Who might be your allies at an international and national level to kind of put forth, you know, new forms of copyright, but not just nationally, but to do it bigger. Sometimes it's hard to get out of that academic space because advocacy isn't easy. It requires a long-term commitment, but it is in some ways very political, and that's not something I think we're very good at.
Okay. Gloriana? You have to turn on the mic if you're going to say something. You're still muted, Gloriana. Yeah, good.
It's all about sharing. And what we need in our world is a vision to share with one another. The children need to learn. And in order for the children to learn, we need to begin to share with one another all of the best methodologies to help children learn. And when we learn how to share, then we will learn how to have a better world. That's my vision.
Thank you, Gloriana. So I'll just add one more minute of commentary, and then Ram will read some of the important questions that we can answer before we run out of time. My commentary is about born digital data. I kind of keep worrying, so much is being created every day and every month and every year that's not getting lost. So I was kind of thinking both to incentivize the creators to deposit their creations into an archive. And there is a legal requirement for mandatory deposit but I'm not sure if any of them are following it. And one way I thought it might be possible to incentivize it is to kind of say, if you are deposited, then you can set your own price. Anything you want to use, you can actually set your own price. If you don't put it into a legal deposit, then you have the moral right, but you have no economic right. You can't sue somebody for using it because that's in copyright. You can, you'll get $1. That's it. That is so if somehow it could be set into law that the incentives for digital deposit is very high and non-deposit is very, kind of, you may lose something. Maybe possible, and that would be one way we can kind of get everything at least captured. Like, newspapers and paintings and photographs are examples of that. Forget about books and music and video, which are, but newspapers, 10,000 newspapers are published every day. They're all born digital, and they're not being, most of them are not being kept around. So it would be useful to figure out how to incentivize the thing. And as Erica said, this requires a global movement. And then I will be contacting some of you to kind of see if we can organize several workshops along these lines to see where we go forward. Ram, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Reddy, and for all the speakers for sharing your vision and also perspective of what we could have done differently. The first question is from Dr. Shukla. With contents getting digitally generated, libraries are changing their roles and large groups of users are expecting fast search, landing in getting the related content. Is there any possibility that the definition of libraries is changing and it needs to be defined again?
Erica?
So not all libraries, the difference amongst libraries, academic libraries, I think are really defining themselves very differently than they have in the past. And public libraries are not that far behind in thinking about what it actually means. Now, we may not be the same as a public library, which actually has a lot of programming for young people and things like that that are essential to generate people who are interested in reading and getting jobs and things like that. Academic libraries, in fact, are doing far more than they used to. They're not just simply repositories for content so that you can come in. There's a level of activity of trying to build something to actually provide the means of creation to faculty. And so, yeah, maybe the word library doesn't suit us, and maybe because it's related to the Latin liber for book, maybe we need different terminology. But for anyone who thinks that they're going to go to library school and learn about books in the traditional sense is missing the boat. In fact, most of our new hires have and probably this is everywhere, have a whole toolkit of digital competencies, of computer competencies, software competencies that are now essential to do their work. So yeah, does it need definition? I don't know. It's a good thought. But how would you, so Dr. Shukla, how would you define it? How would you see it? I mean, it's fine that we're talking here on the panel, but what about the audience? What are you thinking?
I don't think we have the time right now to audience participate. They can ask questions. I wanted to ask Michael if he has any comments on the libraries of the future.
I don't actually know whether you're asking me or Michael Shamus.
Yeah, and then Mike Shamus is not online. He is dealing with his students in class. So go ahead.
Okay, well, I did speak before. Did that not get through about the problems of social rewards for data?
Repeat it, please. Yeah,
Okay, I've said, I know the first part got through, that I said there was a technical, economic, legal, social set of barriers.
Right.
And we were now really up to the social barriers. People who say if data is the new oil, I'm hanging on to it. And
Right.
where I ended is this is a university problem. If you reward Tycho Brahe more than you reward Kepler, which is a reversal, you'll get people sharing data.
I see.
The other thing I'll say is that I don't know what should be done in what organization. One of my students spotted a job ad at Yale. The biomedical library wants to hire somebody who can do data curation and teach data curation. And I looked and said, gee, at Rutgers, that wouldn't be in the library. That would either be in the medical school, the biological sciences departments, or just possibly the computer center. So it's interesting to me that Yale is in the library, and I don't really know where the typical university puts someone who does data curation and data archiving.
I see. Okay.
So can I follow up on that? So one thing I would say, Michael, you posted a thing about NIH and NSF. We know that some data management plans have actually been rejected. That's how we got in the business of helping people with data management plans. They were turned away. So the extension of that is data curation. And we help people with that. We try to encourage people to put it in our institutional repository or a subject repository if that makes more sense. But yeah, the library is, as I like to say, the library is not just about books and journals. It's about information. And who cares what format it's in? We need to be conversant with that.
Ram, you have the floor again.
Thank you, Erica. We have one other question from Kanan. The question is, an activity related to books is the creation of digital courses, at least in academia. These courses are all in different formats. Is there any attempt to define a standard in the learning management systems that host digital courses? That answer would be very useful for me because that's what I'm primarily focused on right now, creating a lot of digital content.
Why don't you go ahead and answer it?
Oh, I don't have an answer. I'm looking for the experts to answer the question.
I don't think any of us have talked about a learning management system. That's a whole kettle of fish, lots of other issues that may not be directly something, unless someone wants to comment on learning management system. Bob, you have.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention, which I think is very relevant exactly to this, is, again, this is my experience for years and years, which I no longer will do anymore, which is with ISO and ANSI standards, the United Nations standards, is the way these typically start is one or two people will go to the ISO committees. They will say, we want to start a standard on a thing. And those people are typically, they can be academics, they can be from anywhere, and a lot of them are academics. But they have the funding to go to ISO. And then the way it works is that if you're the only US person that happens to be in that group of 4 or 5 or 6 people who get together and get approved by ISO to pursue a standard, then you are the US vote. That's how it works. You do not get elected to the US vote. You do not get appointed to the US vote. If you're the only US citizen there, you have the US vote. Isn't that simple and wonderful? And this can change the world. It's changed the world in video. It changed the world in content, in Hollywood type content. Okay. And it has not touched the world of books and the world of other information. Okay. Simply because nobody knows, nobody seems to know that I can be working on a farm in Iowa. And I'm perfectly capable of going to ISO and saying, I want to start a standard on blank. And if they approve that you've got enough people together to do it, you can do it. And then once you've done the standard, there's a voting process that takes place after that, which is a process, but it's still just those people have to vote. Although any other country can come in toward the end of the voting process, any other country can come in and say, we want this person to vote on this standard. So another country can come in who didn't participate in the standards process. They can come in as part of the United Nations and vote to say yes or no on that standard. So at the end, every country that's a United Nations member can actually vote, be a part of the vote that approves the standard. But notice that none of this required an ultimate authority coming in and appointing the people who do the work. Okay. The whole process comes from the ground up and is cheap. It is easy to do. It only involves some time by some individuals. So this is to address these kinds of issues. You can have that kind of an activity that ultimately winds up, and it can handle situations where a copyright owner may say, I want $1 million to read a word of mine. No problem. It's part of the interface.
Okay. Bob, you're elected to be the chair of that international.
So the only thing
I can
I would
definitely
add,
explain how ISO works.
the only thing I would add is lack, not having any standards. What we're doing for our digital courses in our LMS is providing very context sensitive links to additional information in that area, so that that users find very useful. There isn't a librarian there, but then it's still limited to what the professor or the TA is saying, okay, is useful information. So I was thinking that there are ways to actually expand the horizons for students in digital courses as well, without actually having to go to a library or do independent searches on their own. But with that being said, I'd like to, Dr. Reddy, to give some concluding remarks. I know we had a couple of minutes over.
The concluding remarks is, this has been a wonderful session, retrospective on what we tried to do and what we did in 20 years ago and before. I think the next 3 days promise to be very interesting. I encourage all of you to join in, and thank you all.